And now I'm very pleased to introduce Béatrice Peltre.
Bring my phone.
Born in the northeastern French countryside, she also lived in New Zealand before making her home in Boston with her husband and daughter. A food writer, stylist, and photographer, she showcases much of her work on her food blog, La Tartine Gourmande. That blog gave rise to a cookbook of the same name. Her first cookbook, La Tartine Gourmande, captivates you with its beautiful, colorful photographs of some of the freshest looking dishes you could think of. The subtitle of the cookbook, Recipes for an Inspired Life, rings through in every photograph and anecdote. You will certainly be inspired to make the dishes you see in this book. If just leafing through and looking at the bright fruits and vegetables will bring a smile to your face, then actually cooking these dishes will be a truly inspiring experience. Before I turn things over, I'd just like to thank you for buying books from Harvard Bookstore. By doing so, you're supporting an independent business and allowing the future of this author series. Now, please join me in welcoming Béatrice Peltre.
Thank you. Well, good evening, everyone. First of all, I'd like to apologize. I have a little bit of a cold, so if my voice sounds a little funny, that's the reason. So I'm here today to speak with you about my book, La Tartine Gourmande, Recipes for an Inspired Life. My journey really started started in 2005 when I decided to start my food blog out of my passion for food. I grew up in a family where there's a very strong link to food. Nobody skips lunch. Everybody is always talking about food. And naturally, just being based in this environment, I myself started talking about food all the time, and which explains the reason why, at the time, I decided to start a food blog, which in its own way evolved and became successful. So one thing leading to another, I was lucky to be given the chance to write a book. And this book is really trying to capture the things that are important for me, that is making food look beautiful. The book is a collection of my favorite recipes from when I grew up, but also revisited with my own inspirations from ingredients that I like to cook with now. You know, I would give you an example. Being French, and I come from a very small village, I'm pretty sure as of today, my mother never cooked with coconut milk. So in my book, there's a lot of recipes that include coconut milk because that's an ingredient that I discovered when I started actually traveling the first time to New Zealand, because there was a strong Asian influence in the country. So it is those recipes that are French-inspired, but that are just different. I like to call them like with a little twist. It's modern French. I find it colorful, happy. Not truly vegetarian, because I'm not anymore a vegetarian. I used to be, actually. But if you actually look through the collection of recipes that I have, there is definitely a sense of my love for grains, vegetables, fruits, because I was a vegetarian for 9 years. Actually, when I moved to the United States for the first time, it was much easier to be a vegetarian in the US than in France. It is, so those recipes, with also recipes that are inspired by my travel around the world, because I just love traveling, and that's also why I live in this country now. The book is not actually advertised as gluten-free, but it happens to be gluten-free too, because that's something that I had to do at some point in my life, and I actually discovered, although I will admit that at the beginning it was quite frustrating, but because I stuck to it and I was decided to learn, I absolutely loved the whole process, even if there were a lot of trials and errors at the beginning, especially when you love to bake. You know, there's a lot of things that don't work. But basically now, as I was writing the book, it made sense for me that it became gluten-free. And for me, it's like basically celebrating food, and actually, you know, it is gluten-free. So I'm not really sure the best way for me just to talk about the book and how I included the recipes. The best perhaps would be if you had any questions, and I would be very happy to answer any questions that you have about the book. I guess I've always been someone who is interested in visual arts, and that's something that came across anybody visiting my house. I love interior design and things like that. When I started the blog, my first pictures were absolutely horrible. I was just shooting with a point and shoot. I had no idea what I was doing. But obviously, I knew how to recognize what makes a beautiful picture. So I was determined to learn. And so I just did what a lot of people, I suppose, do. I bought magazines, and I thought, I want to be able to do this. So I improved my equipment. From a point and shoot, I bought a better camera, a SLR camera. And the same thing, I really worked hard at it and didn't have any training, which I must admit was a little hard for me at the beginning because I'm completely French trained in that sense, believing that unless you have a degree, you can't do something. And my husband, who is American, kept telling me, this is stupid. I mean, what are you talking about? Of course you can do it. So I just stuck to it. I worked hard. And, you know, I was very passionate about what I do. I just, the strengths that I had, which I was not necessarily aware of, or at least where it was going to lead me to, was that I always liked to make beautiful plates. So even when we were eating simply at home, I like to decorate them well. You know, so that I am a strong believer that you eat with your eyes first. So that led to, you know, trying to improve my skills at styling. And I actually learned that, you know, being a food stylist is a profession, and it's a hard one. And then when you add to that the layer of being a photographer, it's another thing. So I just love to produce beautiful images and, you know, very happy and colorful, playful. Very French. A lot of people tell me they look French. I don't know what they mean, but they say that. So yeah, so that's my experience with it. I'm not trained, and I just followed my passion for it. So, I mean, the only tricks, I learned some tricks of the trade, such as, for example, when you want to improve the quality of the food behind the camera, you would, for example, brush it with olive oil. So, you know, sometimes, you know, I would take, like, let's say I have cooked a piece of meat or vegetables, you would take a little brush and then you just retouch this way. But everything is edible, and just because I eat it, yeah. And I think actually more and more, not necessarily always in the United States, but actually, and I believe it's still true today, in countries like Australia, it is not allowed to use things that are not edible. Everything that you retouch needs to be true. So, so that's my philosophy behind food. So in 2005, I changed my career path. I was doing something completely different before, and I could have done the same thing, but I decided to follow my passion. And I took a risk, and, you know, for still today, but like for the first years, obviously, my husband supported me, which is obviously very helpful, because I just thought, if I want this to succeed, I need to give it some time. So we decided just to try and work hard. And then when I saw that the blog was taking on, I decided to stick to it. Everybody always knew from my environment, like, you know, my roommates when I was in college, or my friends, basically, that I love food. And people that came to my house always thought, you know, why aren't you a chef? I knew I was not cut. First of all, I'm not trained as a chef. So again, the confidence problem with French. But I just thought, this is not what I'm supposed to do, but there's something else. And the blog was really this opportunity that I grabbed that basically gathered in one place all the things that I'm good at and I loved doing, such as cooking, writing, styling, and photographing. I've always loved photographing, but, you know, it was just more like as an amateur, just going on vacation and just enjoying, just taking pretty pictures. So I just stuck to it, and you know, it is because of the blog, I think, that I'm here today, because without it, I would not have the recognition that I received. You know, it's true in the United States, but it's true in other countries, in other places like New Zealand, Australia, Europe. And it's really, I mean, the internet just made that. It really helped me in that sense, I have to admit. Yes. Do you shoot your images in a raw format? Yes, I do, yeah. And I always retouch them. you know, because when you shoot raw, I mean, you have to retouch contrast, the colors, and, you know, try to correct your mistakes. Sometimes the crumb that you don't like, you just Photoshop, you know, it out. You're trying not to Photoshop, you know, too much, but, you know, you can use it, so I use it. Mm. So it happened that, unfortunately, after the trip to Peru, I became quite, how would you say, annoyed by some symptoms with my stomach. And basically, I investigated, and I did all the exams that one can be told to do. And I had a very good doctor that told me, you know, you do definitely have symptoms, but there's nothing we can find. But because I knew someone who was celiac, so, you know, I thought, why don't you do a blood test for me? The blood test came negative, except that it showed that I was reacting to gluten. So I thought, that's interesting. So I'm not celiac, but there's something definitely that is happening in my body. And I had some genetic tests that were done that showed that I was predisposed to gluten intolerance. So I thought, okay, fine. Thanks, Daddy. Thanks, Mom. But especially being French, you know, you're in France, all the bread, the baguette. And so it was very difficult to accept that if I wanted to improve, I had to try to give this diet a try. And it's not something that happens overnight. But I was determined to try and to learn. And I would say maybe after 5 to 6 months, I really saw how much better I felt. And I tried every time I was going back to France to eat baguette again. And I was sick. I was feeling very bad. So I thought, okay, that's it. I mean, that's what it is. But what's been amazing with this is, you know, life is, I think, is sometimes made this way. There's something really hard that happens, and you just feel, oh, what am I going to do with this? And then it brings something much better. It actually becoming gluten-free made me a better baker, cook. I feel better. I understand how flours work in a much better way. And I discovered new flavors too. You know, it turns out that all the flours that I end up using are much more nutritious, especially when you're actually vegetarian. They have much more proteins. Generally speaking, they are not refined. So in a way, something really bad just brought something very positive. And I'm really very happy just to have being gluten-free part of my journey now, you know. I first had someone who approached me, an agent first approached me and asked me if I was interested in writing a book. And I said, oh, yeah, actually, I always wanted to, but I don't know how to do that. So she said to me, well, you should write a proposal. So I said, okay, what's that? So she showed me a sample, which is probably thick like this. And I thought, great. So the two of us worked at the proposal. And that's back, I imagine, maybe 2 years after I had started my blog. And we worked on an idea, and then after the proposal was finished, she approached publishing houses. But I suppose, we gave it 6 months, something like that. And at the time, my blog was there, but it was not as strong as it is today. And I just decided to retract and decided, you know, I don't think this is right. I don't think the idea is good, and it's been too consuming. So I stopped for a year and decided to focus on the blog and developing new skills. At that time, I was also working for clients, you know, who wanted photography and styling work. And one day I decided, I think I'm ready again for this book. So funnily enough, at that time, I contacted a friend of mine who had an agent, and I said, you know, could you introduce me to your agent? And she said, sure. So I contacted her agent, and her agent found my blog and said, you know, I really love what you do, and let's write another proposal. So we wrote a proposal, and at the time when I actually was working with her, my current publisher approached me and I said, would you like to write a book? So even if my current publisher approached me, we still decided to work with my agent, and I still decided to keep her, because the choice is, and I think, you know, I don't want to generalize, but I think generally speaking, authors in the United States have an agent. It's a choice, but, you know, a lot of them do. I decided to keep her, even if I obviously had an interested publishing house, but decided to work with my current publisher because of a set of different reasons. The fact that they really believed in my work, which was very critical for me, because I really wanted someone to let my creative voice speak, and I wanted to be involved in the creative design, and they did that very well. They were local, which, you know, is not necessary, but it's nice. You can actually meet people more often. And it's been a great journey. I've learned that things don't always go according to schedule the hard way. But in the end, I'm very, very pleased because they really allowed for the book to be really an extension of my blog, which is really what we wanted. We wanted the book to reflect the blog, even if you will never get in a book what's in a blog. And I was aware of this. You know, I tried to cram more pictures in, said, like, come on, those ones. But they kept telling me, no, there's enough, you know. But that was my journey with it. Well, there's different elements. Definitely, the first one will be, I always think, you know, and it might not be true for everyone, but I always think aesthetics. So for me, like, again, you know, there are obviously recipes that are not going to look as nice in a picture than others. But I always think, okay, like, I need a set of colors that I want to work with. And then I look at the series of ingredients that I like to work with. All the recipes that are in my book and typically that come on my blog really are food that I love. So you would not find things that I'm not very fond of. I'm not sure, like tribes, you know, things like that. It's going to have a lot of vegetables, fresh produce, you know. It's going to go with the season, you know. I'm trying to stick, I'm not always 100% about that, but, you know, sometimes I crave strawberries in the winter, and I know it's bad, but that's, I allow the crave. And I just work around a palette of colors and flavors, and I am someone who loves to use spices and fresh herbs. And I try to be original, you know. This goes back to the idea you have a recipe that you know that works well. Like one of the recipes in the book is a typical gratin dauphinois, you know, which is thinly sliced pieces of potatoes with cream that you just bake in the oven. The typical one doesn't have cheese, by the way. And I thought, okay, what would be interesting with it? So I decided to use different vegetables, you know, the same family, root vegetables. So it could be turnips, sweet potatoes, butternut squash for color. And, you know, specifically when it's the high season for the farmer's market, I'm always the one who goes and, you know, always the intention of having very little to buy, and I always come back with so much stuff. Because one day I just decide, I see pink turnips, I'm thinking, ooh, what am I going to do with that? So it's sometimes a visit to the farmer's market that is going to lead the recipe, and sometimes it's more like I know of a classic, something that I know how to do, and I'm trying to bring new flavors and make it just different. So recipes from New England, let's see. Cranberries. You know, I had never eaten cranberries before, so there's a recipe for a upside-down cranberry cake. And, you know, I was very excited the first time I visited the cranberry bog. I mean, it was all exotic for me. What else? Well, that's a good one for New England. New Zealand, it's a set of things. New Zealand, I mean, there's obviously a food culture in New Zealand, but it was difficult for me to bring it completely, so it was more like the way I ate in New Zealand and things that inspired me, because I lived with different people. I had a lot of roommates when I was living in New Zealand. So, and at the time, that's actually, I think my friend Sandra introduced me to Thai food. I had never eaten Thai before. Because you have to understand, like, I know France has a lot of cities, but I really come from a small village in France, whereas you eat French. And so I was very inspired with those flavors, and I just learned more about them. And it's just this whole exotic palette that just basically sneaked into my cooking with flavors of lemongrass. I mean, I have some very French, in essence, tea cakes, but I decided to chop very finely some lemongrass and then flavor the cake with that. So things like that I just decided to just give a little exotic touch to it. And lastly, so my daughter Lulu is 3 now, and yes, she's very interested. It's for me, obviously, I'm very attached to giving her the exposure that I received myself. I mean, I don't have here grandparents that have a farm like I had myself. So the way I do it, I take her to the farm as much as I can. Like Drumlin Farm is a good one locally, which I love. So I go there, and she can see the animal. And this year I planted vegetables with her. So she was very excited 2 days ago that we collected the first radishes, and she kept saying it's mine. And then bring her in the kitchen. I mean, yes, it can be messy, but I really want her to just to have fun with it. That doesn't mean, this said, that she eats everything I make. Let's be clear about that. And it can be frustrating, but I think that's being a parent, especially I think I am so determined for her to eat everything that, of course, stubborn as she is, she's like, yeah, no, that's not what I want to eat. I have a little anecdote about that. We have this very nice friend, Ron, who lives, and actually the recipe is in the book, but he lives on the South Shore in a beautiful house and cooks wonderfully and likes to drink wonderful wines. And so we were very lucky that for a series of years he invited us for Thanksgiving dinner, which was very traditional, even if he's a very big Francophile and loves to cook French. But obviously, Thanksgiving, he made the turkey and the stuffing and all those things. And he asked me to bring a dessert. And I thought, oh, God, what am I going to do? I had never made a pecan pie before. What else? And I could have gone online and looked for recipes, but I'm very, I don't know if it's funny, but like, I just basically decided no, I'm going to bring my own recipe. And I remember that time I was a little short of ideas, but I had worked on a recipe that included a double-layered cake with basically a 2-chocolate mousse cake with a little bit of a sponge cake. Because actually in France, when you have a celebration, Christmas, Easter is a big one, you're still going to try to make cakes that are just like, they can be casual, but it's always like the kind of visual thing that is, at least was in my mind. So I thought I want a cake that is like gonna look good, even when you look at it. And I believe I was in that phase where I wanted to make more intricate cakes. So I brought this 2 mousse chocolate cake. One was a white mousse layer, and there was a dark mousse layer, and then there was a dark chocolate sponge cake that his mother, who was, I believe, 97 at the time, or 95, she could not stop eating it. So I thought, I was very happy that actually my cake just did so well. Because, I saw the whole, he had put everything as a buffet type, and everything was very traditional, and there was my cake. And I thought, oh, it's really kind of like looking different. But it worked. Well, I suppose that when I started, I didn't really know. There were so many things I wanted to talk about and share. So I just tried to cram as much as I knew and all the techniques that I had and follow trends, like I was following blogs more at the time too. So you get, I'm sure, influenced by what you see. And specifically the French blogging scene, which focuses more for some reason on techniques, Anglophone blogs, whether in the States or in England, I think, are more were more storytelling. So I was torn between the two because I'm French, so obviously I follow what I know the best. But then I saw this whole set of blogs that were very different, I suppose once I had discovered that I enjoyed writing because it was not something that was necessarily as obvious at the beginning because I had to write, and I had made the decision to write in English, but it was always more of a challenge for me to write in English because it didn't flow as well. But I really found that I enjoyed writing stories. I'm not saying like a little bit stream of consciousness, but let me say that right. It sounds maybe sometimes stream of consciousness when my husband says, like, what are you saying? I don't get it. Because I was just putting sentences that made sense to me that were just like going to follow my day, my life, the things that I love. And obviously, when I became a mother, my life changed and my blog changed with it as well. I wanted to simplify things. So it's not necessarily something that I did intentionally, but it's, I really realized that I wanted to focus on quality. So even one thing that you might have seen at the beginning, and obviously there are different factors that affected this, but I used to blog much more than I do now. Today I don't blog as much because I have less time, but also I've also always been, and even more now, focused on quality. So I'm not gonna blog if I'm not happy with what I write, with the pictures, or if there's not any interest. And I'm not gonna blog about everything. So before, I think when I started, it's almost like I wanted to blog of every single piece of food that I ate, every restaurant I went to. I had to take pictures of everything. That drove everyone insane. Like, don't move, can't eat. So this phase kind of like, okay, you know what, I've done it. It's not fun for anybody, and it's not fun for me because it's putting pressure on me as well. So I just look at it more, it's just almost like little snapshots, little stories, short stories that I like to write that focus on moments, a recipe that was inspired by a walk to the beach, or I go on a vacation, I travel somewhere, and a meal that we have with friends. And that's, I think, what the blog evolved into, generally speaking. There was definitely always a story with the recipe in the middle, and how this recipe is going to create a memory. And I think that's what I want to do with the blog. I want to be able to remember. It's almost like that the blog is a little bit of my journal, my log about the things that I love and the moments of my life. So, sometimes it is just a pretty picture. And sometimes I feel, shall I post this? Something, yeah, actually, I like this picture today, and I want to post it. And there's not necessarily a big story with it, but that's what it is. Yes, so there's a local farmers market. There's different places that I like to go to, like Wilson Farms, which is close to where I live, for more delicate foods. I would obviously go to Formaggio's for cheese and ham and jams, and that's where I buy the strawberry syrup, le sirop aux fraises, for my daughter. And the funny part is when I go to Formaggio's, and one day I only went there to buy sirop aux fraises, and I thought that's all I'm going to buy. And I came back and I had spent $200. And I just wondered, how did that happen? I don't know. So places like that are obviously very tempting for me, because I see, this mustard with estragon. Oh, I have to have that. There's obviously, at the time, when I ate more bread, and I still stop by, and I'd love them to make more gluten-free things, but there's High Rise, which is very nice. So these are the little places that are the extras for just special ingredients. And the rest, I would buy a lot online as well, actually. When I need, I even, which is sad to say, but I even have, my mother sent me some pistachios because they are very, very green. For example, last year I had the big plan to make a lot of pesto, and I had like a jungle of basil. I was so excited, and then there was a frost. So that was the end of my pesto story. But yes, I think as a food stylist, that's definitely a good point. It's very important for me to have fresh herbs all the time, because even if you buy something fresh today, tomorrow it's going to look wilted. It's never going to look as fresh as possible. So my garden is not very big, but I try to focus on a little bit of everything, fresh herbs. So I have chervil, dill, basil, oregano, marjoram, everything, thyme, a little bit of everything, parsley, lemon balm. Then I like certain things because the same thing, I think, as a stylist, what would I like that is hard, even at the farmer's market, to find as fresh as possible? And one is, for example, peas. Like if I want to have pea tendrils, you buy them, they're never going to look really, really fresh. So I plant them. And they're really growing slowly this year because of this rain. So tomatoes a little bit, but that's not something that would be necessary because there's so many beautiful ones grown by the farmers. But I'm trying to focus on the things that I have much harder time to find. Well, I'll be honest with you. being French, I'm not really looking for French food. Because every time I look for French food and there's something, I'm always disappointed. And you know, you mentioned that it's affordable. You know, then you go into the other bracket of French restaurant, but then they think it's top-end, elegant, and it's very stuffy ambiance and everything. And that's not, for me, the French food that I prefer. Frankly, there's a big shortage, I think, in Boston. Like I was in Montreal 3 weeks ago, and we went to this gorgeous little place called Le Comptoir. They had a prix fixe, a three-course menu, like entrée, plat résistant, dessert, for $15 Canadian dollars. And it was amazing. It was beautiful on the plate. It was not too much. It was just perfect size. And I thought, where is this place in Boston? It's not there. And I know some people try, you know, but it's for that price, you know, that quality of food, I haven't found it yet. So I'm sorry I can't answer this question because sometimes there's a brasserie, it comes and it goes, it closes. I've heard good things recently from some French friends, and I must say I've never eaten there, so maybe you have, but they just told me actually this past weekend that they had eaten at La Voile. So, yeah, it's on Newbury Street, is that right? Yes. So it's more like of a brasserie. But yeah, when I go out, I don't necessarily look for French. Well, for example, before coming here, of course, I was for a short time at home. I made a big pot of like sweet potato, butternut squash. I know it's not really seasonal, but you know, with orange and coriander and what else? What did I put in it? Carrots, soup. So I make a big pot, and so I have this soup, and then I'm gonna have always a salad on the side. So it could be a little arugula salad, and I slice some avocado, radish, feta cheese, and something simple. So my key is I always keep, you know, I get very panicky when my fridge is empty. So I never let that happen. I always have a selection of things in my fridge just in case I need to make something. So there's always going to be carrots, there's always going to be leek, there's always going to be zucchini, you know, depending on the season, but sets of things that set me off to make something. And you know, someone just asked about making sure that you just, sorry, I just... No. But oh yes, the simplified. Sorry, it's like I simplify foods as well. So you know, I always have something at home to make a risotto, and a risotto is something nice. Despite what people might think, I think it really reheats very well. I don't reheat it in the pan. I always steam it to reheat it so it stays moist. So I just never think about just one meal, and then that's it. I always think, okay, I have this meal that could give me this meal, and then that meal could just become that meal. My mom was a very good, and she's still today. My father always says, which cracks me up, but he always says we don't throw anything at home. So, you know, she keeps everything in little Tupperware in the fridge all the time, and I became that person too. I always keep everything just in case I need to reuse it for something. Sometimes I must say I end up tossing things, but I always try not to. And, you know, a leftover of rice might become a rice salad, something like that. And so I try to recycle food, and you know, if I have a base of rice, I'm gonna add fresh ingredients as I go. But you know, during the week, like I really think having a big pot of soup is something wonderful, always. That is, of course, you have to like soup. I mean, even like you think about the images, you know, I put a lot of time in to create those images, you know. One image could take 2 to 3 hours to make because, and that's not necessarily that's not even sometimes including the preparation of the food. So just to do what I do, I need to be very organized, and that's a big difference, for example, from when I started to today. When I started, I used to make the food, style, photograph, and then eat right after. And it was horrible because, you know, you always eat when it's cold, and it's just, it's a disaster. I mean, it's fun for a while, and after that you think, you know what, I'm not enjoying this. So now I do it differently. I'm going to basically set up a chunk of time in my day. This is my job. This is my project. And if I have to make a cake, I'm going to set up a time, just, okay, 1 hour and a half to make the cake or an hour to make the cake. And while I'm doing this, I have to prepare my set where I look at the light. I start deciding about the props I'm going to use. So whether it's the kind of fabrics, the kinds of plates. And I don't necessarily always have a vision at the beginning of, which is, depending on the image, takes more or less more time. Sometimes it's very fast. I have a vision and I think that's it. And, and sometimes an image takes 5 minutes, but sometimes it takes 2 to 3 hours. And, I work very hard at, specifically when I work with fresh produce, just to keep the best herbs, vegetables, play a lot with the shapes. I'm someone who loves to think about my images as, for me, it's almost like it's kind of a painting. I like just to think about, I want to make it look, ooh, I really like that, So nothing is incidental, even if it looks it's incidental. It's been very carefully positioned the way I want it. Sometimes, something that I've learned recently is like I take, specifically when I have the food and someone recently said, a food stylist said, the best looking herbs, the best position are the ones that you take from very far and drop. So I try that and think, oh, actually, that's fun. Sometimes it works. And so it really kind of shortened my time just to sometimes really, no, you know what, I push it here. No, I don't like it, not here. And that takes a long time. So yes, it looks very easy, but it's not. Well, I read, for example, Heidi's 101 cookbooks. She wrote a very lovely blurb for my book. There's a lot of, I follow different blogs for different things, but I'm someone obviously very sensitive to images. So for images, there's a beautiful blog by this French woman who lives in New Zealand. So she's touching me for two things, but her blog is at Down Under. There's also, Orangette, who writes a beautiful blog, and I love her blog because she's a beautiful storyteller. So yeah, there's a collection of them. The French are not very big on breakfast, but if you think about that, in my family, we love to make fruit tarts, so des tartes aux fruits. So you would have apple tart, clafoutis, and a cake. And so often, people would actually basically take the leftover of an apple tart or like a chocolate cake or any kind of food like this and then bring that to the breakfast table. I didn't grow up, the French eat croissants, so they would be more like brioche, which is obviously very French in that way. But even today, if you travel to France, the breakfast is going to be very kind of minimal. You're going to have tartine with butter and jam and croissant. So yes, if you like croissant and pain au raisin, which is raisin, rolls. Those kind of things are very traditional. But the French are not. There's not a strong culture for breakfast. And yeah, well, yes, you could. But again, it's more like, I would not say that it's French in that sense, but some people, I've known French people eating that cold on the breakfast table and thinking, oh, how can you eat that in the morning? But, some people do that. No, I mean, the typical French thing would be you would have stewed apples, in compote, and then you would have tartine. But we are not very big on breakfast. And like I said, the fact that I actually love to eat cheese and ham and all those things makes me not French traditional in that way. I must be more like a Scandinavian because, like in the Netherlands or like in Norway or those countries where they eat lots of cured meats and cheese and yogurt, and I love that. I actually really extending my breakfast palette by traveling. You know, the first time was in England, you know, where really breakfast with eggs. Oh my God, you can have eggs in the morning. It's great. So this and then granola and all those things that I had never eaten before. I mean, things obviously are changing now, but still today, if you travel to France, and then especially you look at the cereal section in a supermarket is way smaller than anywhere you would find here. On the other hand, the French really love yogurts. And in France, you go to the supermarket and you find walls with yogurts, dessert, we call them crème dessert, flavored with whatever you want. And then I go here and thinking, where are the yogurts? There's nothing. So it's just, it's funny, but we are not really a breakfast culture. I grew up drinking café au lait. You know, so this bowl, like cafe latte, I guess it's the equivalent of a latte now. So you would have a big bowl, like the French bowl with coffee and then milk or hot chocolate. And sometimes it's a question of whether you dip or not. You know, you dip your tartine or not. So that's what I grew up with. You know, there was I never ate cereals when I was growing up. My first year in the United States was in '95 when I was a teaching assistant in a university in Illinois. And I took a road trip with a friend. And so we traveled with a car down to Louisiana, all those places. So I was younger, so maybe not as interested at the time, or I was on a budget too, so it was not as easy to eat, but definitely there was a lot of that influence, Cajun and all those things. But there's always room to improve and learn, so it's nice. Like, I mean, there are definitely ingredients I know I said it before, but like cranberries, you know, I had never eaten a cranberry before, and that's definitely something that I've loved to experiment and then add to when I make granola or like cereal bars and things like that. Another flavor, let me think. I have to think about that. I'm not so sure. I mean, obviously, I am influenced, I'm sure, in many ways, but that's not something that stands out necessarily. Making a living of the blog, I mean, can certainly be done, but it's just a question of how much emphasis you want to give to your blog for specifically, for example, the placeholders for ads or things like that. You know, I personally decided not to put too much emphasis on it because I personally do not like when I go on a website or a blog and it's all I see. But I do have a little bit because, you know, I'll be frank, it just generates a little bit of income that is sometimes paying for my props. So it's, you know, I'm not going to say no. But I know some bloggers that are just completely full-time bloggers and live off their blogs. But it's not necessarily that they do only one thing. They end up just like really kind of incorporating more things to the blog, having people participate. So there's different formulas, but it's just a question of what do you want to do with the blog and whether it's something that would be a good fit for you. I mean, you get, in my position now, I have received emails every day of people wanting to place ads on my blog. Yes, and most of them turn them down because I don't want my blog to become just ads. But yeah, I do receive a lot of people contacting me for that. Yes, I mean, obviously, I check Google Analytics once in a while, but I must say I don't focus on it as much as I used to, because it's very difficult to know for sure that's the number that you get, because I'm sure you're aware that, you know, there's a difference between whether you come directly to a blog, which is what counts for Google Analytics, and whether you read a blog through an aggregator, which is very hard for me to know how many people do that. And I know, you know, there's a bunch of people that in that audience that I have prefers to read information this way. Looking at Google Analytics, I get 150,000 visitors a month. Is that right? Yes, I think so. Yes, so about like 8,000 visitors a day. And that's counting for Google Analytics. Which is why it's difficult, because there's so many different sources. You know, I have people subscribing to my blog via my newsletter, and I have different people subscribing different channels. The main difference between baking the way I used to and the way I bake now is when there's a recipe that, for example, calls for wheat flour, and that's what there is, the formula unfortunately doesn't work. You can only substitute wheat flour for, let's say, white rice flour. So I've worked around establishing some ratios of so much I need in a recipe just to make this work. So in other words, the closest equivalent, for example, to me anyway, wheat flour would be millet and quinoa, because they pretty much have the same weight. They keep a lot of moist, so they're gonna keep your baked goods moist and airy. But obviously they're going to become crumbly, so you need to add a little bit of starch. So whether it's under the form of cornstarch or sweet rice flour, and then something that is not in the book, but that I actually found as I was experimenting more, sometimes you can make a chia seed gel where you basically soak some chia seeds, and that's going to give a little bit more stickiness. And then the flours that are heavier and have a lot of character, which can't be used alone, but are wonderful to add to, for example, buckwheat would be lovely with chocolate. You have teff flour, you have white rice or amaranth or whole rice flour. These flours are much heavier, so don't expect, for example, if you have a cake that calls for, let's say, 1 cup of all-purpose flour and put 1 cup of white rice flour, that you're going to have the same result. It's going to be bad. So I've learned that you definitely pretty much divide. I mean, it's a generality, but it's like you have 1 cup, and then I divide that in 3 things. And what are they? So then I play. But I think my main flours as replacing wheat plus something else would be millet and quinoa. And quinoa, I like it, but I know some people sometimes get sensitive to the taste because it has a stronger taste than wheat flour. So that's why you need to make sure that you balance it properly so that it doesn't overpower the baked goods that you're making. So that's the kind of things that I've learned by experimenting. Thank you.